Hey guys, tonight we are wandering into a world where the smell of warm wax drifts heavier than the scent of roasted lamb, where the shuffle of sandals over marble floors drowns out your own stomach growling, and where the most powerful force in the empire isn't a general's sword, but a clerk's stamp. You're stepping into the Byzantine bureaucracy, an endless maze of parchment seals and ceremonies, so thick with red tape that you probably won't survive this journey without at least 3 paper cuts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here.
And hey, I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it right now?
Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of Constantinople's great palace, sunlight catching on golden mosaics that glitter like fish scales. The city around you hums with energy. Street vendors calling out prices for figs and olives, donkeys clattering over stone roads, and church bells chiming from domes that pierce the skyline. But your eyes drift not to the markets or the sea. It's the mountain of scrolls in front of you that demands attention. They aren't literal mountains, though they might as well be. Each decree, each tax record, each complaint written in looping Greek script is piled so high that it feels like you're hiking through parchment slopes. One wrong step, and an avalanche of papyrus could swallow you whole. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine bureaucracy was the most advanced of its age or the most absurd. On one hand, it kept a sprawling empire stitched together across centuries. On the other, it turned even the simplest request, say for a bridge repair, into a ritual of stamps, counter-signatures, and forms copied 3 times by candlelight. You reach out to touch one scroll, its edges rough beneath your fingers. The ink has faded to a dusty brown, but you can still trace the words, a tax record from a farmer on the edge of Anatolia, pleading that drought had ruined his crops. Did anyone ever read this? Or was it tucked away in a stack so thick that even the rats gave up chewing through it? The clerks around you don't seem troubled. They move like dancers in a very slow, very repetitive performance, unrolling scrolls, nodding gravely, dipping quills, pressing seals into warm wax. Each gesture is deliberate, ceremonial, as though the paperwork itself is a sacred rite. And maybe it is. In a city where emperors could be blinded or dethroned overnight, the only constant was paper. Paper doesn't plot. Paper doesn't stab. Paper just piles up, waiting for your ink. You trudge forward, sandals slipping slightly on polished marble. The hall smells of beeswax, smoke, and ink. The clerk at the nearest desk looks up, his face lined with exhaustion, eyes half-lidded. He mutters something about practicon, the register of tax assessments, and waves for you to drop another scroll on his pile. You hesitate. Is this the moment when you disappear forever, lost in an empire of parchment? Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since morning. But no one else here seems to notice hunger. Lunch breaks are a myth. Bread crusts sit forgotten beside ink pots, stale and stiff as wood. You begin to realize something both impressive and unsettling. The men in this hall value their stamps more than their stomachs. The mainstream fact is, Easy Byzantium truly did maintain one of the most complex bureaucratic systems of the medieval world, with offices for taxes, justice, military pay, and religious affairs. Every scrap of paper mattered. A missing signature could hold up an army's salary for weeks. But here's the quirky tidbit: some clerks were known to store their wax seals in little decorated boxes, polishing them like treasures, boasting about whose imprint looked most dignified. A man might skip lunch, but he would never let dust touch his seal. You pause again, staring at the nearest stack of parchment, wondering how many lives are buried inside those dry rolls, soldiers waiting for pay, widows begging for pensions, merchants petitioning for trade rights. Each request captured, frozen, and filed. Each human story flattened into ink and forgotten beneath the next decree. The sound of quills scratching, the flick of wax cooling, and the endless sigh of tired clerks fill your ears. You feel drowsy, lulled by the rhythm of bureaucratic eternity. And yet you can't shake the thought these men didn't care about feasts or festivals. Their real devotion was here in paper mountains rising higher than ambition. The air in the hall thickens as the morning drags toward noon. You glance at the doorway, half hoping someone might shuffle in with trays of food, perhaps figs, olives, or a loaf of warm bread. But no, the only thing carried past you is yet another bundle of scrolls tied in twine. Your stomach rumbles again, ignored not only by yourself, but by every clerk at the tables. They don't look up, they don't shift in their seats. Their eyes are fixed on seals and signatures as if lunch is nothing more than a legend. You slide onto a worn wooden bench. Across from you sits a man with ink on his fingertips and wax flakes in his beard. His quill scratches across parchment in delicate lines, looping Greek letters one after the other, until he stops, heats a lump of red wax, presses his seal, and exhales in relief. He doesn't reach for the stale bread beside him. He doesn't even sip from the chipped clay cup of watered wine at his elbow. Instead, he picks up another blank sheet and begins again, more eager for the next seal than the next bite. That's the rhythm here, ink, wax, stamp, not chew, swallow, digest. Historians still argue whether these officials were truly dedicated civil servants or simply trapped in a culture where paperwork was worshipped like a relic. You watch them and wonder, was this devotion or was it madness? And yet you begin to see why the stamp matters more than the sandwich. A sandwich fills your belly for an hour. A stamp decides who owns land, who pays tax, who lives with favor or falls into ruin. When an entire empire can turn on a scrap of parchment, that small circle of wax suddenly looks far more nourishing than bread. Your neighbor on the bench, noticing your gaze, holds up his seal proudly. The imprint shows a tiny saint holding a cross, intricate despite its size. He grins as if he's just displayed a rare jewel, and in a way he has stamps in Byzantium were not only tools, but also symbols of identity and authority. Some clerks inherited family seals passed down like heirlooms. Others had custom designs, carved part artistry, part branding. Quirky? Tidbit. A few clerks were known to keep miniature collections of their favorite impressions, tiny wax discs lined up on shelves admired like coin sets. Imagine it men who hadn't eaten since dawn, happily bragging about whose saint looked holier in wax. You rest your chin on your hand and listen. The hall is alive with small noises, seals thunking onto parchment wax, dripping like candle tears, and the occasional groan when a clerk realizes he's smudged a signature. One man curses under his breath, then quickly scratches out a correction. Another waves his parchment in the air, trying to dry ink before it smears. It's less like an office and more like a kitchen, except instead of cooking meals, these men cook legitimacy. Your own belly protests again, louder this time. You remember walking past the bakery that morning, the smell of sesame bread curling through the alleys of Constantinople. You should have stopped. Now you're trapped in a room where food is an afterthought, overshadowed by little red circles hardening on parchment. And the irony, the empire did feed its workers. Salaries were supposed to include grain or small coin stipends. But in practice, delays and shortages meant clerks often went hungry while their scrolls multiplied. That forgotten loaf on the table may be his only meal all day. The man with the wax flakes finally leans back, sighs, and allows himself a nibble from the bread. He chews without enthusiasm, eyes still on the seal cooling before him. Bread may sustain his body, but the stamp sustains his pride. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The rhythm of bureaucracy is hypnotic. Scratch, drip, press, sigh. It almost lulls you to sleep, even as hunger gnaws deeper. You imagine what it must have felt like to dedicate your life to these rituals, to prefer the satisfaction of a flawless seal to the taste of fresh figs. And suddenly you understand the truth of it here. Stamps aren't just tools. They're tiny thrones of wax, granting power, identity, and meaning in a world where emperors rise and fall like storms. Lunch can wait. The stamp cannot. The hours slide past as if dragged by lead weights. The hall grows hotter, filled with the faint metallic tang of ink and the sweet smoke of burning wax. Outside you hear the distant rumble of carts and the cries of merchants, but in here the soundscape is tighter, more repetitive. The scratch of quills, the pop of wax, sealing the echo of sandals pacing across marble. The palace corridors carry every noise, so even a cough ricochets like a trumpet. You rise from the bench and wander into the adjoining hall. It's even grander here, marble pillars veined with green mosaics of saints glittering in the half-light and arching ceilings that stretch so high you almost feel seasick looking up. Your sandals clap on the stone and the echo makes it sound as though a whole parade follows you. These corridors are deceptive. They whisper grandeur, but what they truly hold is paperwork. Historians still argue whether Byzantine bureaucracy's obsession with ceremony was deliberate statecraft designed to awe and overwhelm, or simply inertia, a system too entangled to untangle. But here in the palace you feel the effect firsthand. The corridors themselves seem to mock you, reminding you that the empire is less about speed and more about spectacle. Along the wall, bronze oil lamps sputter. Their glow throws long shadows that waver like phantom clerks bowing and writing in endless repetition. You trail your fingers across a cool slab of marble, etched with faint grooves from centuries of sandals, boots, and even bare feet. Every step you take is one countless clerks have trudged before, burdened not by swords or shields but by scrolls. A group of notaries passes you, now their arms stacked with parchment bundles tied in red cord. They speak in hushed voices, gossiping about a governor in Antioch accused of skimming taxes. The details may never reach the emperor's ear, but the whispers echo just as loudly as official decrees. That's the quirk of these halls. Marble amplifies not only power, but also rumor. Quirky? Tidbit. Some clerks were said to memorize gossip with the same devotion they memorized laws. A juicy scandal carefully repeated could serve as both entertainment and subtle leverage. Forget tavern jokes. Palace corridors were buzzing theaters of whispered intrigue. You pause beneath a mosaic of Christ Pantocrator, his golden halo glowing in the lamplight. Below, a row of clerks hunches at a long desk, their shoulders curved like question marks. One sneezes and the sound ricochets down the hall like a trumpet blast. The others groan not out of illness, but because the sneeze disturbed the rhythm of scratching quills. Here, even your nose is expected to obey bureaucracy. The irony isn't lost on you in an empire famed for mosaics, churches, and military daring. It's these anonymous men who keep the machine turning. Their glory isn't sung in hymns. It echoes only in the marble corridors, in the faint thump of another seal pressed home. You lean against a pillar, listening to a pair of clerks debate their argument whether a decree should list 2 cows before 3 goats or the other way around. You bite your lip to stifle a laugh, but to them it's deadly serious. A misplaced word could alter a tax record, spark disputes, or worse, draw the emperor's displeasure. And there lies the reality: the emperor's eye is everywhere, even when unseen. A decree improperly sealed, a parchment sloppily written, could end a career. It's no wonder stamps eclipse lunch. Food fills your stomach. A correct seal keeps your head attached to your shoulders. You tread deeper into the corridor. Every surface gleams, every corner echoes, every parchment carries weight. It's beautiful and suffocating at once, like walking through a jewel-encrusted cage. And as you breathe the air heavy with wax and rumor, you realize that in Byzantium, bureaucracy wasn't just paperwork, it was performance. A play acted on marble stages where every stamp was a drumbeat and every corridor an echo chamber. You drift further down the hall until the sound changes, no longer the rapid scratch of quills or the heavy silence of debate. It's a murmur of voices tinged with something sharper. You round a corner and find a chamber lit by tall windows, sunlight pooling across polished floors. Here, clerks gather not with scrolls but with small sacks and crates. It smells faintly spicy like pepper and cinnamon, with a sour undercurrent of sweat. This is payday. Well, payday In a Byzantine sense, you might expect coins, maybe a pouch of gold or silver. Instead, a man beside you opens his sack to reveal peppercorns, little black beads spilling out pungent enough to sting your nose. Another clerk lifts a basket of dried fish, while a third grumbles over a jug of olive oil handed to him as wages. Salaries in Byzantium weren't always metallic. They were often paid in kind with foodstuffs, spices, or cloth. Historians still argue whether this was clever resource management or just another sign of imperial inefficiency. After all, paying clerks in peppercorns guaranteed they wouldn't starve, but it also meant they had to haggle in the market just to convert their pay into something useful. Imagine explaining that to your landlord, "Sorry, no coin this month, but I can offer you 3 sacks of pepper." The scene is almost comical. A man in fine robes, his seal ring gleaming, holds up his pepper pouch like a trophy, boasting that pepper's value is higher than silver on some days. Another mutters that he'd prefer bread he could actually eat. You can't help but smirk at the absurdity these men wield power over the lives of soldiers and governors, yet they squabble like children over the size of their spice rations. Quirky tidbit. There are accounts suggesting that some clerks secretly tasted or even chewed peppercorns during long hours of copying sharp little bursts of flavor to keep themselves awake. No coffee, no energy drinks, just pepper on the tongue to chase away sleep. You picture yourself popping one between your teeth and nearly sneezing the ink right off the parchment. The distribution grows louder. Some clerks complain their sacks are lighter this month. Others argue that the dried fish is spoiled. A scribe with ink-stained fingers waves his arms, shouting that he deserves double rations for working late. The overseer ignores them, stamping his wax seal on a tally sheet. Here too the stamp rules above all. Even payment in spices is not valid until sealed. You step closer to the window, inhaling the peppery air, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams. Outside, Constantinople bustles ships unloading grain at the docks, hawkers shouting in the streets. Out there, pepper is luxury. In here, pepper is rent money. It makes you reflect, what kind of world is this, where a man can starve surrounded by spices, where his pride comes not from bread on the table, but from the perfect wax seal cooling on his decree. The voices rise again, now a full-blown quarrel. One man insists that pepper should count as equal to coin, another retorts that it's worthless outside the market stalls. Their argument bounces off marble, growing sharper in the echoing chamber. You half expect someone to flip a table. But just as quickly as it flares, the dispute fizzles. The overseer slams his seal onto the ledger, the wax impression cooling like a commandment. Conversation falls silent. The clerks clutch their sacks, muttering, and drift back to their desks. The cycle resumes, ink, wax, stamp. Lunch still forgotten. You linger, still amused by the scene. It's strange, comforting even to know that beneath the grandeur of the empire, people still worried about spoiled fish and light rations. The palace may gleam with mosaics, but its lifeblood is pepper wax and paperwork. The clatter of sacks and the peppery tang fade behind you as you wander deeper into the labyrinth of the palace. Soon the corridors narrow the marble, giving way to plaster walls lined with faded frescoes. Here the mood shifts. It isn't about wages anymore, it's about titles. And in Byzantium, titles aren't just decorations, they're entire worlds of meaning, status and privilege piled so high you can barely breathe under their weight. A clerk passes you, bowing slightly, and introduces himself not as Michael or Andronikos, but as protonotarios of the Secretor, humble servant of His Majesty. The string of syllables dangles like a jeweled necklace. You nod politely, though you only catch half of it. He beams anyway, proud of the ceremonial syllables clinging to his name. Everywhere you look, men are wrapped in layers of honorifics. A notary is not just a notary, he is chartularios. A record keeper is not merely a scribe, he is protocombs. Titles pile up like parchment stacks, ornate and sometimes absurd. The Byzantine state didn't run on bread or coin alone. It ran on the intoxicating perfume of rank. Historians still argue whether this obsession with titles was a way to keep ambitious men satisfied without real power, or whether it genuinely reflected the complexity of an empire that stretched across cultures and centuries. You lean against a pillar and consider maybe both are true. After all, it's easier to hand out impressive words than to share actual authority. A clerk approaches, eager to show you the new embroidery on his robe, proof of his recent promotion. The threads glitter in candlelight, tiny golden leaves stitched onto the cuff. He strokes them with pride, oblivious to the ink stains on his hands. You wonder if he even remembers the last time he ate lunch, or if the sweet taste of rank is enough to fill his stomach. Quirky tidbit. Some officials actually paid bribes just to be awarded lofty titles with no real job attached. Imagine spending half your salary in peppercorns just for the right to be called logothete of something obscure, like fisheries in a town you've never seen. You shake your head, amused paperwork and pride more nourishing here than bread or wine. You drift toward a chamber where an audience gathers. A minor dignitary is being promoted. The air buzzes with ceremony candles, flickering courtiers, chanting the man's full string of titles, clerks scribbling records of the event. A cushion is brought forth upon which lies a new seal ring. The man kneels trembling as the ring is slid onto his finger. The crowd murmurs, half envy, half admiration. You almost laugh. It looks like a wedding, except the bride is bureaucracy itself. Your stomach growls again, sharp as a trumpet. No one notices. All eyes are on the glittering seal. The dignitary rises, tears in his eyes, clutching his new stamp like its divine relic. He bows again, and again, each movement solemn, rehearsed, and slightly ridiculous. You slip away down another corridor, feeling both charmed and suffocated. The empire is choking on titles and seals, yet you sense a strange comfort in it all. The Byzantines may have been obsessed, but obsession gave them order. Titles smoothed egos, stamps smoothed disputes, and so the machine kept grinding century after century. As you walk, you whisper a few titles to yourself, letting the syllables roll off your tongue. They taste like honey mixed with dust, sweet but heavy. In a world where even bread was sometimes a luxury, perhaps ceremony was enough to sustain. Your sandals scrape against the marble floor as you make your way back toward the scriptorium. The hall is dimmer now, heavy curtains drawn to keep out the glare of the afternoon sun. The light that remains is softer, filtering through narrow windows and catching on particles of dust that drift lazily in the air. The dust looks almost like snowflakes, but not cold, not refreshing. It sticks to your throat, dry and irritating, much like the ink-stained life of a Byzantine scribe. You pause by one of the long desks. A young clerk hunches forward, his shoulders curled, his head tilted just a little too close to the parchment. His quill scratches in steady rhythm. Dip, scratch, pause, dip again. After a while he leans back, rubbing his temples. His fingers are smudged purple with ink. Even the nails are darkened, and the skin is raw where he's chewed nervously at the cuticles. You look closer. The ink pot is nearly empty, a thick crust forming around its rim. The parchment is smeared in the corner where his wrist dragged too fast. He sighs and shakes his head, reaching for a knife to scrape the error clean. One wrong line, one blotch, and the whole decree is ruined. Paper in Byzantium wasn't cheap. Mistakes weren't casual. They were punishments waiting to happen. Historians still argue whether scribes were respected professionals or exploited drudges. Some were highly educated, earning influence with their skill in Greek and Latin. Others were barely literate, yet forced to copy mindlessly for hours. Either way, the ink told the same story, smudges on their hands, stains that lingered for days, proof of labor etched into their skin. Quirky tidbit. Some clerks supposedly used pumice stones to scrub the ink off their fingers before public ceremonies. Without it, their hands betrayed them, blackened like those of chimney sweeps. And just as with seals, a clean hand was a point of pride. A noble might flaunt a ring, but a scribe flaunted unspotted skin, rare as it was. You sit beside the young clerk, imagining his day. He probably rose before dawn, washed quickly, said his prayers and hurried here before the lamps burned out. He's been copying since morning, pausing only to dip the quill or stretch his aching back. His bread ration still sits untouched beside him. You wonder how he manages to ignore it, whether hunger has simply dulled into background noise. Another clerk down the row sneezes, splattering ink across a half-finished scroll. He groans, slamming his fist on the desk, while the others chuckle softly. Even in monotony there's camaraderie. Misery loves company and smudges are universal. Your fingers itch to try the quill yourself. You pick one up, dip it in the ink, and drag it across a scrap of parchment. The nib catches sputters and leaves a blot. You grimace. The young scribe smirks politely as though to say, "Yes, exactly, it isn't as easy as it looks."
Hours pass like this, dripping slowly as wax from a candle. You feel the ache in your neck, the stiffness in your shoulders, the numbness of legs cramped against the hard bench. It's hypnotic in its own way. Painful but lulling, like rocking on a ship in choppy seas.
And then the bell rings, faint, distant, signaling the next shift of duties. The clerks straighten, shake their hands, stretch their backs. The young one blows gently on his parchment, watching the ink dry to a dull sheen. He smiles with quiet satisfaction. For him, this isn't just paperwork, it's survival, maybe even meaning. You glance at your own blotched scrap and laugh softly. No wonder they care more for stamps than for sandwiches. A flawless page, a clean seal, that's nourishment that lasts longer than bread. The day leans into afternoon, and with it comes a change of rhythm. You follow the clerks into a chamber where benches circle a low table. Here they gather not to copy or stamp, but to argue. Scrolls are unrolled documents read aloud in nasal tones, and the room fills with the drone of endless deliberation. You settle onto a bench and brace yourself. At the center, an older clerk holds a parchment like it's scripture. His voice echoes as he reads, and therefore the tax on goats shall be levied at 2 per household unless said goats are deemed essential for military transport. The others murmur, heads nodding, some scowling. Then the debates begin. 2 goats is unreasonable. It should be 3. No one is sufficient if they are shearing goats. You blink. The bread crusts on the table beside them are already stale edges, curling, but no one reaches for them. They're too absorbed in the great goat debate. Historians still argue whether these deliberations were genuine attempts at careful governance or simply an excuse for endless ritual. You suspect both. To a Byzantine details mattered commas, word order, even the placement of a seal. Laws weren't just laws, they were miniature monuments carved in ink. You can't help smirking at the seriousness of it all. They're hungry, tired, surrounded by stale bread, yet their energy flares when a punctuation mark is questioned. One man insists that a clause should end with a semicolon rather than a period. His neighbor argues that the mark doesn't exist in proper usage. The volume rises hands, gesturing wildly, crumbs scattering as elbows knock the forgotten bread. Quirky? Tidbit. There are accounts of deliberations that stretched so long that candles melted into puddles and clerks had to scrape wax off the table before resuming. In some cases, they even forgot to dismiss the servants waiting with food trays. Platters of fruit rotted quietly while the debate raged on. Your own stomach twists with hunger, but you realize theirs doesn't. They've trained themselves to feast on arguments instead of figs. Their nourishment is the thrill of precision, the taste of being right. Bread fills the body. Commas fill the soul. The session drags on the sunlight shifting across the floor. You lean back drowsy, listening to the cadence of voices rising and falling. It almost becomes music, the sing-song recitation of clauses, the stern bass of objection, the occasional squeaky cough of someone desperate to add a point. The bread remains untouched, harder now, more decoration than meal. One man slams his fist down, rattling the ink pots. Silence falls, then erupts again into argument. The cycle repeats, order, chaos, order, chaos. You realize the debates themselves may be the point. They're rituals of power, proving who can speak longest, who can endure hunger for the sake of a perfect sentence. Finally, The parchment is passed around each man, pressing his seal into wax, with a satisfied sigh. Decision made, though you aren't sure what exactly was decided. The bread remains abandoned. The seals, however, gleam freshly in the lamplight, as though more nourishing than any meal. And you can't help but laugh softly. In Byzantium, commas trump crusts, punctuation wins over pastries, and seals shine brighter than the sunlit figs outside. The arguments fade into the background as the clerks shuffle back to their desks, but one lingers behind, polishing something in the lamplight. You step closer and realize he's holding a small wooden box. He flips it open like a treasure chest, and inside, dozens of wax impressions carefully arranged in neat rows. Circles of red-brown and even a few in faded green, each stamped with different designs. He beams as if he's showing you gemstones. You realize you've stumbled into a collector's pride. These men don't just use their seals, they cherish them. Each wax impression is a tiny piece of art, pressed and preserved. Some display saints, others monograms, some mythical beasts. One has a lion with exaggerated fangs, another shows a delicate cross flanked by stars. Historians still argue whether such collections were merely hobbies or symbols of subtle rivalry. After all, seals weren't just tools, they were signatures of power. To own a distinctive seal was to broadcast identity. And so clerks sometimes guarded their designs as jealously as knights guarded swords. You take one between your fingers, it's hardened now, cool and slightly rough. The impression shows a two-headed eagle wings spread wide. The collector smiles proudly, whispering that it once belonged to a superior who retired. He kept the wax disc as a souvenir, a strange inheritance but somehow more meaningful than coins. Quirky tidbit. There are scattered accounts of clerks trading seal impressions the way children today might trade baseball cards. I'll swap you one lion for your saint with the fancy halo. Imagine the scene: grown men's stomachs, growling giddy not over food, but over wax, tokens. The hall grows lively as more clerks pull out their own samples. One man boasts about his seal featuring the Virgin Mary, claiming it offers protection. Another displays a rare square-shaped stamp, unusual in a world of circles. The group murmurs appreciatively, heads nodding as though they're at an art exhibit rather than a dusty office. Nearby, the bread crusts from earlier sit harder than bricks, utterly forgotten. One clerk even uses a loaf as a makeshift paperweight, anchoring a parchment against the draft. You laugh under your breath. In this world, bread is ballast, stamps are sustenance. You wander further, watching as the men heat wax, strip it carefully, and press their seals with exaggerated care. The moment the impression cools, they lift it gently, holding it to the light. Satisfaction blooms on their faces. It's as though each perfect stamp is a heartbeat, proof that they're alive in this paper ocean. The echo of stamping fills the chamber, thump, lift, sigh, over and over until the sound is almost soothing. You close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the rhythm. And you realize these collectors aren't just eccentric, they're surviving. In a world where emperors vanish overnight and bread spoils before it's eaten, the permanence of a wax seal is comfort. Stamps outlast hunger. Stamps outlast men. The echoes of stamp collectors fade as you drift down another corridor where the air grows thicker, warmer, filled with the low hum of voices. You round a corner and step into a chamber that feels less like an office and more like a waiting room. Benches line the walls, sagging under the weight of weary petitioners. Farmers in rough wool tunics clutch rolled parchment. Soldiers dusty from the road shift restlessly. Widows in black shawls wring their hands. All of them wait. The petitions never end. A clerk steps forward, taking one scroll at a time, unrolling it with deliberate slowness. He scans the words, expression unreadable, before stacking it onto a pile that already leans precariously. Another petition is taken, another scroll joins the heap. The line doesn't shrink. More people slip in through the doorway, clutching hopes bound in parchment. Historians still argue whether this system was efficient justice or bureaucratic cruelty. To you it feels like both. The empire prided itself on hearing every voice, yet the sheer volume drowned them all. A farmer begging for tax relief might wait weeks, months, even years for an answer. By then his goats or his patience might be gone. You sit beside a soldier who smells faintly of sweat and horse. He mutters that his unit hasn't been paid in 6 months. His petition is simple wages owed, but he knows it will vanish into the pile like rain into sand. He spits on the floor, then slumps back, resigned. His hand drifts to the hilt of his sword. The parchment is his plea, but the blade is his backup plan. Quirky tidbit. Some petitioners grew so desperate that they embedded coins inside their scrolls, hoping a bribe would catch the clerk's attention. Imagine unrolling a document and having silver clink to the floor. The clerk might clear his throat, glance around, then slide the coin into his sleeve before nodding solemnly at the importance of the petition. The chamber buzzes with murmurs, coughs, and the occasional wail of frustration. A widow kneels before a clerk, thrusting her parchment forward with trembling hands. Her voice cracks as she pleads for her son's exemption from conscription. The clerk doesn't meet her eyes. He stamps the scroll, adds it to the pile, and gestures her aside. Next petitioner, next scroll, next forgotten story. You notice the bread again, crumbs scattered on the benches, a half-eaten loaf resting beside a soldier's elbow. Unlike the clerks in earlier halls, the petitioners eat when they can. Hunger trumps pride. They gnaw hard crusts while waiting, their eyes fixed on the piles of parchment that might decide their lives. The scene is endless, overwhelming. You close your eyes and listen. The drone of voices, the rustle of parchment, the faint thud of seals. It's a lullaby of bureaucracy, but a cruel one. Each sound is both promise and dismissal, nourishment and denial. As you watch, another clerk staggers under the weight of new petitions, adding them to the mountain. The pile teeters, but doesn't topple as though mocking the hope of collapse. You almost wish it would fall, scattering the scrolls, mixing them so thoroughly that fate itself would have to reshuffle. But it doesn't. The pile grows higher. The line grows longer. And the petitions never end. The chamber of petitions fades behind you, but the weight of it lingers, the voices, the pleading, the smell of dust and sweat. You follow another corridor, wider now, its floor gleaming with polished marble. At the far end, heavy doors swing open and a new kind of silence greets you. It's not the hush of clerks or the murmur of petitioners, it's a silence of tension. You step inside and feel it immediately, the emperor's presence, even without seeing him. The room is vast, its domes soaring above like a painted sky. Golden mosaics shimmer, catching the torchlight, and every corner brims with guards, eunuchs, and courtiers, their eyes sharp as daggers. Somewhere behind the screens, perhaps on the raised throne, sits the emperor. You cannot see him directly, but you feel the weight of his gaze. The clerks who enter here walk differently. Their shoulders tighten, their steps slow. Scrolls are clutched like holy relic seals polished to a gleam. Every word, every gesture must be perfect. You realize why stamps matter more than bread, because here a single slip of ink could cost more than a meal. It could cost your career, or worse. Historians still argue whether emperors actually cared about the endless documents laid before them. Some claim rulers skimmed them lazily, letting ministers do the real work. Others argue the emperors scrutinized every line, using paperwork as a net to catch disloyalty. Either way, the fear was real. You glance at a clerk kneeling before the dais. His voice trembles as he reads a decree aloud. Sweat beads on his forehead, his hand gripping the scroll so tightly that the parchment crinkles. When he finishes, he holds out the document for approval. There's a pause, long, heavy. Then a hand gestures from behind the curtain. The seal of the emperor is pressed onto the page. The clerk exhales in relief, almost collapsing. Quirky tidbit. Some emperors supposedly had favorite colors of wax for seals, insisting decrees be stamped in red, purple, or even gold-tinted mixtures. It wasn't just bureaucracy, it was performance art, reinforcing majesty in melted beeswax. The room is stifling. You feel as though the emperor's unseen eyes pierce through you, weighing your worth, measuring the smudges on your hands. You bow instinctively, though you carry no scroll. The silence presses harder. Finally, a scribe near the throne coughs lightly and the chamber stirs. Another document is read, another decree, sealed, another life altered by wax. The rhythm continues, slower than the scriptorium, but heavier. Each stamp here doesn't just file a record, it shapes policy, redistributes wealth, reassigns armies. The stakes are higher, the tension thicker. You slip out as quietly as you entered, heart still pounding. Outside, the corridor feels wider air, easier to breathe. And yet the sensation lingers, the Emperor's eye, invisible but ever watchful. You realize that every parchment, every forgotten lunch, every seal pressed with aching fingers is ultimately for him, for the man behind the curtain who may or may not even glance at your work. You shake off the weight of that unseen gaze and keep walking. The corridors narrow again, twisting into a maze that feels deliberately confusing. Perhaps it is. You follow painted walls and flickering lamps until you stumble into a smaller office where a clerk sits slumped over his desk, chin in hand, glaring at a parchment. He's muttering under his breath, repeating the same phrase, "There must be a way." His quill taps the desk, his foot bounces. Finally, he throws the quill down and sighs so deeply you feel it in your own chest. You've just walked into the heart of a universal truth. No one really escapes paperwork. He had tried. You discover. He thought maybe if he skipped one of the steps, just a little one, just a signature here or a seal there, no one would notice. But of course someone did. Now he has 3 more scrolls dumped on his desk, each one demanding corrections for the missing step. He rubs his temples as if the parchment itself mocks him. Historians still argue whether Byzantine bureaucracy was deliberately complex or simply evolved that way, a beast growing limbs faster than anyone could cut them off. Was it genius control or chaos with good handwriting? Whatever the truth, shortcuts are illusions. You sit nearby and watch as the clerk tries again. He dips his quill, scratches a note, folds the parchment, carefully seals it, and then realizes he's used the wrong wax color. The sigh he lets out is more theatrical than a monk at a funeral. He scrapes the wax off, reheats the pot, starts again. Minutes stretch into hours. He hasn't touched his bread. Quirky? Tidbit. There's a surviving account of one official who tried to bribe a messenger to lose a troublesome document. Instead, the messenger delivered it straight to the palace. Not only was the bribe wasted, but the clerk ended up buried under twice the paperwork as punishment. You notice the pattern. Every attempt to shave off effort somehow creates more. It's like the hydra of bureaucracy cut off one head and 3 scrolls grow in its place. A simple request turns into a chain reaction. This needs that signature, which requires that seal, which demands another copy. The parchment multiplies like rabbits, and the clerks sink deeper into the warren. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment. The scratching of quills surrounds you, the drip of wax, the faint hum of muttered curses. It's oddly soothing, like rain falling on a roof you don't have to fix. But then another clerk slams his desk with a fist, cursing the gods of red tape, and you jolt awake. The bread on the table has grown so stale it could be used as a weapon. One clerk picks it up, studies it, and mutters that it might be better suited as a stamp pad than as food. The others chuckle weakly, too tired to laugh properly. So you sit, letting the futility wash over you. The harder they push, the thicker the maze becomes. Shortcuts don't free them, they ensnare them, and somehow impossibly they keep going. You wander deeper into the maze of offices, and suddenly the air changes. It smells faintly of roasted lamb, honey, and spiced wine. Your stomach growls before you even realize the scent is real. You've stumbled into preparations for a feast, or at least what should have been a feast. A wide hall has been set with long wooden tables, platters of bread, bowls of olives, roasted meats still steaming. Candles flicker in polished bronze holders. It should feel celebratory, but instead the room hums with frustration. Instead of dining, officials are hauling in armfuls of scrolls, stacking them between dishes. Parchments sprawl across the tablecloth like invasive vines pushing aside plates. A roasted goose sits half-carved, forgotten, while clerks squabble over which decree needs to be signed first. Historians still argue whether banquets like this were political tools or genuine moments of relaxation for bureaucrats. Some say they were meant to impress visiting dignitaries, others believe they were simply excuses to keep the machinery of state running late into the night. Either way, the food often ended up as collateral damage. You watch one clerk jab his quill dangerously close to a bowl of figs. Ink splatters across the table, narrowly missing a loaf of bread. Another clerk waves a parchment in the air, demanding clarification about some clause, while the man beside him gnaws distractedly on a chicken leg with one hand and stamps with the other. Breadcrumbs rain across the wax. Quirky tidbit chronicles mention one banquet where a cake was so large it required 2 men to carry it in. By the end of the night, no one had eaten it because the cake had been used as a flat surface for rolling out documents. Imagine the sweet smell of honey sponge mingling with molten wax. You sit down at the end of the table trying to salvage a handful of grapes, but even those roll away as someone shoves another pile of scrolls across the table. The grapes scatter to the floor ignored, the wine jugs remain corked, the cups untouched. One clerk finally raises a goblet only to dunk his quill in it absent-mindedly, mistaking it for ink. He takes a sip, grimaces and sets it down. The tension in the room grows. What was supposed to be celebration has turned into another battlefield of parchment. Voices rise overlapping. The roasted goose cools, the lamb stiffens, the bread hardens. Platters that once promised warmth now look like museum exhibits of wasted abundance. You lean back, listening to the chaos, the clatter of plates, the shuffle of papers, the wax seals thumping against the wooden surface. It's a symphony of priorities twisted upside down. Here, meals are not nourishment, they're backdrops, props. And like every backdrop, they are expendable. The feast collapses not with a bang, but with a sigh. Clerks slouch in their seats, bellies, still empty parchment signed, but crumbs untouched. You realize this isn't a meal, it's another workday just dressed up in candlelight. You leave the echo of that wasted banquet behind, following a dimmer corridor, where the air feels cooler, drier. The smell of food fades, replaced by something older, dust ink leather. You step into a chamber so silent it almost hums. Rows upon rows of shelves stretch into the gloom, stacked with scrolls and codices, bundled in cords, tagged with little wax seals. This is the Empire's memory, the archive. A lone archivist shuffles between the stacks, his lantern swinging in rhythm with his steps. His robes are patched, his back hunched, but his eyes gleam with a kind of reverence. He strokes the bindings of scrolls like a man petting sleeping animals. To him, this is not a workplace, it's a monastery, and parchment is his scripture. You trail behind him, brushing your fingers along a shelf. The scrolls feel brittle, as though they might crumble if you breathed too hard. The archivist whispers that some of them have not been opened in decades. Generations of clerks wrote them, sealed them, filed them, and then no one ever came back. Forgotten decrees sleep in the dark, their wax seals unbroken, their words never read. Historians still argue whether these archives were truly organized or merely hoarded. Some insist Byzantine record-keeping was astonishingly precise. Others suspect it was just a labyrinth of forgotten paperwork where even the clerks themselves got lost. The archivist pauses at a shelf and carefully extracts a scroll. He shows you its faded seal, cracked and dull, belonging to an emperor long dead. His voice drops to a whisper as he muses that every seal is a soul and every scroll a ghost. He wonders aloud if when his own body fails, he'll become part of the shelves too, another layer of dust in the Empire's endless memory. Quirky tidbit. There are medieval anecdotes claiming archivists requested to be buried with parchment, or even sealed inside stone chests as though paperwork might accompany them into the afterlife. Perhaps they imagined the afterworld as one endless, orderly filing room where no decree ever went missing. You sit for a moment on a low stool, gazing down the aisles. The shelves seem infinite, fading into shadow. It's easy to imagine eternity here. No sun, no feasts, no stamps, even just scrolls multiplying forever, an empire of paper beyond death itself. The archivist coughs, tucks the scroll back, and shuffles away. You're left with the sound of your own breathing, the weight of centuries pressing from every direction. For the first time you wonder if the Byzantines truly lived at all, or if they simply documented themselves into a kind of paper-bound immortality. You step out of the archives, the dust still clinging to your clothes, the silence echoing in your ears. As you walk back into the lamplit corridors, your mind circles the same question, the archivist whispered. Was all this order, or was it obsession? Historians still debate it. Some argue that the Byzantine bureaucracy was the glue that held an unwieldy empire together, the reason Constantinople stood while Rome crumbled. Others say it was the empire's greatest weakness, strangling itself in its own ribbons of red tape. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the strength and the sickness were the same thing, inseparable. You picture a farmer waiting years for his petition, a soldier eating crusts while his pay rots in unopened scrolls, a banquet collapsing under parchment stacks. To outsiders it all looks absurd, yet to those inside it was the rhythm of life. Without stamps, nothing moved. Without signatures, nothing breathed. The system fed on itself like a serpent swallowing its tail. Quirky tidbit. Some modern scholars even playfully compare Byzantine officials to obsessive collectors like stamp hobbyists who never mail letters. The empire's scribes weren't hoarding for fun, of course, but the sheer volume of records feels almost compulsive, like they couldn't resist pressing one more seal, drafting one more copy, filing one more version, just in case. And yet you have to admit, there's beauty in it. The wax seals bright as jewels. The parchment rolls crisp at first, then softening with age. The mosaicked offices, the careful choreography of clerks. It's a theatre of order, even if the script makes no sense. You pause in another hallway, noticing a lone candle flickering against a marble column. The flame bends as if bowing light shimmering across the polished stone. The image lingers fragile yet steady, much like the empire itself. Maybe this wasn't obsession after all. Maybe it was survival. In a world where emperors rose and fell, armies mutinied, and barbarians prowled the frontiers, stamps and scrolls outlasted it all. The wax sealed more than parchment. It sealed the illusion that the empire was eternal. And perhaps you think, with a wry smile, historians will still be arguing that point long after you've fallen asleep. The marble hallway fades into darkness, and you find yourself drifting back toward the scriptorium. The scratching of quills and the faint thump of seals return softer now, like echoes in a dream. You watch a final clerk lean over his desk, dripping wax carefully onto parchment. He lowers his seal with a reverence that looks almost holy. When he lifts it away, the impression glows red in the lamplight, round and perfect. You rub your eyes. For a moment the seal seems to float free of the parchment, drifting upward like a small red moon. Another follows, then another. Soon the room is filled with them wax seals rising from scrolls, glowing softly, orbiting like a constellation of crimson planets. The clerks don't notice. They keep writing, stamping, filing, but you see the seals twirling lazily through the air, some cracked, some gleaming fresh. They spin around you like a strange, sleepy galaxy. You smile at the thought, all those hours of toil, all those missed lunches, all transfigured into something quietly beautiful. Historians still argue whether Byzantium's bureaucracy was efficient or absurd salvation or suffocation. But lying here in the glow of floating wax, you realize the truth hardly matters. What remains isn't the verdict, but the rhythm, the scratch of pens, the murmur of voices, the sigh of men too hungry to care, too proud to stop. Quirky tidbit. There are scattered legends of clerks dreaming of their seals, waking in the night to press wax onto the covers of their own pillows, as if the habit couldn't be shaken even in sleep. You can almost believe it now. The seals in your vision multiply, drifting downward, settling gently against the floor like autumn leaves. Your eyelids grow heavier. The seals shimmer dim and finally fade into the shadows. The last sound you hear is the faint, patient thump of a clerk stamping parchment like a heartbeat echoing across centuries. And now the seals fade completely, the parchment shelves dissolve, and you're left in a calm, weightless quiet. The empire, with all its stamps and scrolls, slips away like smoke. What remains is only the rhythm, the kind of rhythm you can still feel in your chest, slow and steady like breathing in the dark. You picture the wax moons one last time, drifting through a night sky that no longer belongs to Byzantium, but to you. They float higher, softer, until they're indistinguishable from stars. You let your gaze follow them, your thoughts stretching out, loosening, until even the stars are too far to bother with. The noise of the clerks, the crackle of parchment, the smell of ink, they all melt into silence. You're no longer walking the corridors, no longer pressing stamps, no longer waiting for petitions that never end. You are simply here, adrift, safe in the hush of your own breathing. Each breath in is like a scroll being unrolled, smooth, gentle, inevitable. Each breath out is like a seal being pressed, closing the day behind you. There's nothing left to file, nothing left to correct, nothing left to sign. Let yourself sink into that comfort. The Byzantines are still arguing somewhere in their endless halls, but you are free of them now. The night is yours. The quiet is yours. And as you drift deeper, you might wonder, was it order or obsession that kept their empire alive? Or maybe that question doesn't need answering tonight. Maybe it can wait tucked safely away like a parchment in the archive of your mind. For now, just breathe, just rest, and let sleep seal this story shut with a wax stamp all your own.